Okay, hello and welcome everyone. So in this video, I want to talk briefly about the key concepts for the first week of the class, right? The first lecture, we're talking about some of our core principles of economics, in particular, the cost-benefit principle. And then we're also going to think about the opportunity cost principle. So those are our two key principles for this week. Next week, we'll talk about the marginal principle and the interdependence principle. So since we are just starting off the course, let me go over each of the principles, but then I'll spend the most time talking about cost-benefit principle and opportunity cost principle. So let's see if I can make this a little bit larger. So the cost-benefit principle is basically telling us we want to evaluate the full set of costs and the full set of benefits, right? So the cost-benefit principle reminds us to evaluate the full set of costs and the full set of benefits. And then ultimately, we pursue whichever alternative has the largest benefits relative to the costs, right? And so the idea here is, well, we're facing scarcity. Because of scarcity, there's going to be trade-offs. We have to do one thing instead of another. How do we decide what to do? Well, any activity we actually want to pursue, we want to make sure that the benefits outweigh the cost. That's going to be the first element of our decision framework. Something else we're going to want to bring to bear upon this decision is the idea of the opportunity cost principle. This tells us, it reminds us that the true cost of something is the next best alternative that you've got to give up to get it. Right? So the idea is that we want to take into consideration the opportunity cost of something when we decide to pursue one activity rather than another, rather than just paying attention to like the pure explicit out-of-pocket financial costs or money or so on and so forth. The other two principles that will round out our collection of the four core principles are the marginal principle, which basically tells us to break down decisions into incremental, smaller choices, right? So the idea is we want to break down a how many decision down to a series of smaller marginal decisions. So how many miles should I run tonight? Well, I should ask myself the question of, do I want to run another mile, right? Or do I want to run to the next mailbox or the next block or something like that? Maybe breaking down into the smaller incremental steps, right? Interdependence principle says, well, your choice depends on your other choices of other people, developments in other markets, expectations about the future, and many other things. It's basically that you affect other things and you are affected by other things. That's the interdependence principle. So again, for this first week, we are focusing on the first half of chapter 1, right? So you should view the first two lectures, or have already. You should look at the PowerPoint, you look at the slides, this right here, and you should do the first half, right? Cost-benefit principle and opportunity cost principle. Actually, I think the best structure is actually read through the PowerPoint lectures first, then watch my lectures, then do the reading. I think that's the best way to sort of reinforce things. Yes, it's going to be largely the same content. That's by design because of this online version of the class. I want to make everything kind of uniform such that you just have lots of repetition and lots of reinforcement. I think that's really important because we don't have the same sort of experience as we ordinarily would. All right, so again, the cost-benefit principle is going to be our first of the core principles. Our second is the opportunity cost principle. And we want to be paying attention to these and reaching for them in other places around the course. We'll actually be really deliberate about showing where the cost-benefit principle and where the opportunity cost principle and then marginal interdependence principle gets applied in other things that we'll study. Once again, the cost-benefit principle is saying we ought to pay attention to the full set of costs and the full set of benefits, all the relevant costs, all the relevant benefits when choosing whether to do something. And the opportunity cost principle is asking us, what is it that we're giving up? What is it that we're sacrificing? So for instance, I've got the decision to make. I've run 13 miles already. I want to run 15 miles for the day. Ideally, I want to run 25 miles for the day because I want to be well over 100 miles for the week for reasons that I'll go into at some other point. So the question that's now facing me is, do I go and run another 2 miles? I have to consider the full set of costs and the full set of benefits, all the relevant costs, all the relevant benefits. Well, there's costs. There's the time involved. It's the fact that it's getting colder, it's snowing, it's slippery. There's the benefits. Well, I hit my target of getting 15 miles for the week, presumably increased fitness. And I stay on track in terms of I like having multiple workouts in a day to kind of keep my legs from getting getting muscles getting too stiff or whatever. And so I think it's good to kind of keep moving throughout the day. And so, well, I ran this morning, if I don't run tonight, then I lose that opportunity. And so anyway, think about all the full set of costs, full set of benefits involved. That's the cost benefit principle. Well, I think probably the benefits of running 2 more miles exceeds the cost, and so I'm going to go do it. Opportunity cost principle says, well, what's the cost of running those additional 2 miles? Well, it's the foregone use of that time. I could spend that time playing video games, right? I could spend that. So I'm a Packer fan, and whenever, for the upcoming Packer game, I always like playing that game several times on Madden, and so I've got to play several iterations of the Packers versus the Buccaneers in advance of the playoff game this weekend. And so, if I go running 2 miles, I give up the ability to play that game, right? I also give up the ability to make additional economics videos, to think about economics, to get a head start on writing out exam questions. I like to write exam questions little by little throughout the semester. I lose out the ability to spend time answering email or whatever is the case. I actually lose out on the ability to sleep, because probably the time that I'm going to be running is going to be actually close to midnight. And so anyway, so the costs are going to be everything that I sacrifice, everything that I give up when I decide to run rather than anything else. And really the true cost of something is going to be the next best alternative. So what would I really be doing? So I've identified kind of all the relevant costs, but the highest amongst these, the most likely of the highest valued one amongst these is going to be the one that's going to reflect what's my true opportunity cost. This is a little bit easier if there's something like, if I could be working at a job or something, like if you had when I was in high school and college, I worked at a sledding hill, and so I had an hourly wage, and so then I could actually put a value on how much I would have been paid for the time that I'm spending running or studying instead of working. But alternatively, what we do, and this comes up when we're going over the cost benefit principle as well, is we can think about how much you'd have to be, like, what's your willingness to pay? How much would you have to be compensated for that activity or something like this? So when you're thinking about the costs or benefits, if there's not a monetary value already ascribed to whatever is that thing, you can think of, well, how much would I be willing to pay? How much is it worth to me? What's the most that I'd be willing to pay for that thing? That would give me my reservation price or my willingness to pay. And so this is easy for things where I think of, like, what's the benefit of getting coffee from Starbucks or something like that, or from Espresso Royale, or from some other place. I think of, like, how much is that worth to me? And maybe it's like well over $20. Maybe some days maybe it's over $100. That's not the true price. That's not what you actually pay, but it's just a way of quantifying your valuation of that item. In terms of cost, you could think of, like, well, what would I pay to avoid this from happening, or what would I pay to get that time back? And that's another way to kind of think of being able to put a monetary value on something that's not directly already in terms of like a dollar amount. All right. So anyway, so that's our cost benefit principle. That's our opportunity cost principle. Those are the 2 key concepts for our first week of class. And then for next week, we'll go into the second part of chapter 1. We'll think about marginal principle, interdependence principle, and that'll round out chapter 1. The next part that will go in the course will be into demand. We'll start with individual demand, and then we'll go into market demand. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and I'll conclude here. I want to keep these relatively short, and then I'll be available for office hours. Again, office hours won't be a lecture, it'll just be an opportunity for you to ask questions, I guess. I would have wanted to have been able to do like a mini lecture during office hours. Once again, like, I got this really terrible satellite internet, and so I think it would be too frustrating to try to do Zoom with a large number of people for like lecture type stuff. So I'm just going to preserve this format. I think this will work best. Anyway, so hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you around in the class later on.